As per usual, this video is a critique of design and should not dictate whether or not the frame is viable in whatever quote-unquote in-game content you desire. Nor should it imply that the frame is of no use or fun currently. It's merely a point of discussion for one of many improvements that could be brought to the frame. My build and opinion are merely what I've formed currently, so please contribute to the discussion civilly in the comments below. Or just post a video to the forum saying a YouTuber trying to ruin your favorite frame, because that's productive to the conversation. Anyway, Atlas! Let's rock and roll. We're already off to a great start, I know. After his rework, Atlas's passive became incredibly impressive, and is so close to Nidus levels of perfection, it hurts. Atlas's immovable passive prevents him from being knocked down while on the ground. His Rubble passive provides Rubble when petrified enemies are killed or rumblers perish. Each piece of Rubble provides 50 armor up to 1500 bonus armor. It instead heals for 50 health if Atlas is missing health. And then all of the positive things about the passive decay, just like the Rubble stacks. I cannot fathom how a frame that requires effort to become tanky is not allowed permanency of said effort. In other words, it's unnecessary that his Rubble stacks decay without the interference of a nullifier, when so many other frames require much less effort for greater than or equal durability. Then there's the unfortunate pseudo-cooperative design, by which I mean if you're paired with a DPS and you're unable to petrify the enemies, you're only left with rumblers to get Rubble. While having rumblers drop Rubble is better than some other frames with pseudo-cooperative abilities like Haro with Durable, overall it's still frustrating and I would like to see this style of interaction stop. On the excessive side, I would like a movable to meld with his Rubble passive and provide tenacity or a growing resistance to CC as his Rubble stacks increase. There's also the potential to add a charge state to his abilities that costs Rubble, or add a Rubble cost to his force to prevent rumblers dropping Rubble, trivializing player stacking. Landslide irks me because there should be no pseudo-exalted weapons. Either make the ability itself inherently scale properly based on ability mods, or make it an exalted weapon. The fact that these abilities are maximized by riven to stat sticks put them right back to the issues of exalted 1.0 weapons. That being said, Landslide is hardly comparable to some of the melee options available to players. Regardless of how much fun it is to one-punch spam, my opinion is that to some extent, no ability should leave players feeling that a weapon was a better alternative, where appropriate. Enemies such as nullifier drones and arbitration drones should provoke this feeling. I'd like to see Landslide perform similarly to a Rhino's charge where it damages enemies caught in its wake, leaving a path of statues trail that damages and slows enemies over time. If the base scaling, overall not just in strength, is improved to not rely on rivens or otherwise, this could be added instead as an augment or a charge state that costs Rubble that instead petrifies enemies over time instead of just slowing them. This may be an opportunity to talk about alternative casting, say Atlas slamming at target location when Landslide is cast in the air. Though it may not be needed for every frame or ability, it may be time to consider if cast should change if a frame, say wall latches or bullet jumps for example, to better afford the various axes of movement. Tectonics is painful because it pales in comparison to other defense options like Frost, Gara, or even Volt, and its unique recast is thematic, but ultimately it's impractical. Due to one of the following: you use a weapon to clear or CC the hallway, your teammates did so, no clear path between the boulder and the enemy, non-stop parkour action like it's Conclave, Petrify being the better reaction because it also feeds your passive even if your teammates happen to take action first. Or you tried to petrify the boulder and made the enemy CC immune. Yeah, bulwarks could use a more unique effect, such as reflecting damage back at attackers to kind of make them stand out a bit more from other defense options. In addition, rather than rolling, Atlas should just summon the wall to his hands and throw it on recast. This should reduce the gap between player action and ability reaction and feel a lot more satisfying. For synergy, Landslide should break bulwarks to deal damage in a radius. When Landslide detonates petrified bulwarks, it should also leave a field that petrifies enemies over time. This should allow Atlas a bit more tactical play and more buttons than just 3 and 1 throughout the whole entire game. Petrified bulwarks should reflect bullets at a higher damage and progressively petrify enemies with each shot deflected. thrown petrified bulwarks should travel faster with a larger explosion radius and leave a field of petrification. The only real issues I feel with petrify is the actual status effect, petrify. The petrify status provides 50% bonus damage, but at the cost of all status effects. This makes petrify an arguably less effective status considering the potency of viral/corrosive or any combination therein through most of Warframe's content. There are a few channeled or duration variations that could work for this ability. If, for example, while channeled, petrify consumed energy when Atlas takes health damage to petrify enemies, or over petrify's duration when Atlas casts an ability, enemies within his radius are petrified. Either way, I'd like to see Atlas convey some type of resistance bonus to allies when petrify affects them. This will at least afford him more effectiveness in the supportive role. As for augments, Gaze is just one of the more insulting things that I've found. More loot is just a generally useful thing. Adding it to augments seems a bit unimaginative, like they're just forcing the peg through to make the frame quote-unquote have use. Like, does every frame get a pilfer augment? It just seems like they need to put the pilfering mechanic somewhere else, or just go ahead and give pilfer augments all the frames at once so you can balance them against one another. I'd like to see Gaze drop a statue that petrifies enemies in a cone and draws aggro. I want to see augments that actually augment or alter playstyles. Eternal Ward, for example, remedies part of the drawback of having low range on Chroma. Chromatic Blade allows heavy elementals at the sacrifice of IPS. These are augments that feel good, that change builds. So in that regard, you can have the statue have only health and no duration, fixed range, or fixed petrify duration. Because for some reason he needs every stat! We'll get to that later. Rumblers suffer the normal AI-controlled nonsense in that they scale poorly in both offense and defense, and resort solely on AI even though they're companions, and should act and react in some way to the caster using abilities. For example, if you landslide, the golems could shadow the path. Like, even having passive effects like slowing or petrifying enemies over time in their radius could reduce the dependence on AI alone. As for the augment, I would be fine with what the augment does now if the golem summoned was much more unique and effective. I imagine the ability being similar to Ivara's Quiver with 2 or 3 varied special golems, where you have a unique Sandstorm Golem that has heavy ranged attacks and CC pulling abilities, a unique multi-armed melee golem that rolls around in a ball trampling enemies with massive AoE attacks, and a unique Guardian Golem that slows enemies, granting allies the effect of Rubble or damage reduction, and redirects damage that allies take, or allies within the radius of this golem could reflect damage back to attackers. Lastly, I think they need to take a closer look at frames like Atlas because their builds need just about everything in comparison to frames like Nidus, where you have a plethora of options and tactics due to the base scaling and otherwise. Oh, you only have prime continuity? No worries, his abilities have great base duration. Can't squeeze in steel fiber? Fret not, because with 180 power strength, Parasitic Link will give you 90% damage reduction. Have to yeet efficiency out the window? Well, that's fine because you're tanky and you don't have shields, so Rage can make up for it. And that's on top of having a refund mechanic. Just beware of energy reduction sorties. Lower power strength? Who cares, because you'll get more stacks for undying and scaling damage. Unless you just drop duration or range, you can use all of his abilities pretty effectively. Meanwhile, building Atlas seems like a struggle just to get more than one ability to work properly. As fun as it is to drop durability to press 1 the whole time to stay alive. But thank you for taking the time to listen to my critique and hear my thoughts. Hopefully this discussion will at least spark some improvements for Atlas. Feel free to landslide, I couldn't resist, in the comments with your thoughts. And be sure you don't take your days for granted.